Now we're going to talk a bit about how you can reach those audiences. There's so much we could go through. We just had a conversation about social over here and which channels you should target and what you should say on each, and we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but unfortunately we haven't got hours and hours and hours, so we'll try and get through as much as we can. Again, if you've got specific questions about channels, please do flag that up when we're coming round. But what we'd like to think about now is where those people are. Do they, are they in LinkedIn groups? Are they members of industry bodies? Who are they influenced by in terms of their peers or people that they might network with? Do they use LinkedIn solely? Do they have elements of using Twitter both for their personal life and their professional life, or are they mainly their personal lives on Twitter, therefore you may not target them there? So it's thinking about where those people exist, hang out, and where you're most likely to reach them. Do they read trade publications or not? Do they read them in print? Do they read them online? How influenced are they by national media? What are they watching? What national newspapers are they reading? And events, I mean, Lucy talked about events earlier, and there are sort of hundreds that you could go to, and I know there's only so many hours in the day, but if you try to find out as much as possible where your personas are likely to be, LinkedIn is a good place for finding out things like that. But yes, just trying to think about where we can get to them. I think, anything else, Lucy, on that? I think that's the main thing, isn't it? If we could start thinking about it, we can come around and we can talk to you about it.
Yeah, and I think Nikki just mentioned there, like the nationals, and I think the nationals are really interesting because everyone always kind of wants to be on the front page of the Guardian or whatever. But I think just taking a step back, the whole point of this kind of framework is that the nationals are great for lots of different reasons. They will give you lots of traffic and click-throughs, and they're great for kind of reaching lots of people and exposure. But if you're thinking about your personas, if you're selling a piece of education technology, the Guardian home section or kind of culture section might not be the best place for you to be. Something that's much smaller, much nicher, you know, a newsletter that's going out to head teachers in the UK, trade body type of thing, will be much more relevant to you. So that's a slightly kind of flip example, but I mean, it's just about thinking, yes, oh my God, that would be amazing, but is it actually where the person you're trying to reach is most influenced when they're in that buying frame of mind?
Especially when you're also time starved and you know you're trying to do it by yourself. You know, we were talking about Twitter v Instagram over here earlier. Twitter, it is great, but if you're not sure that you're great at doing it, then don't invest your time in it. Put it into where you think your people will be on Instagram, because best to try and do a few things really well than to try and do everything. You sort of scattergun approach haphazardly. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the tips for actually calling a journalist, what sort of story they might be interested in, when's best to call them, what it's best to say. Is that all right after this? And that's when basically we'll just try and tell you everything we can in a short space of time that might help.
Yeah, the sort of hopefully like more kind of tangible bits and pieces. But yeah, that's a very good point, because I think also picking up the phone to journalists and even like how you get numbers and create a sort of list of people you want to get.
Yeah. I think it's quite an intimidating thing, whereas I think with social media, like, it's just you create your own channel yourself, you engage, create whatever.
It's still why so many companies don't do it, because you know it's still like a dark art, the media relations bit. They'll do everything else, quite happy doing the content, quite happy doing the email marketing, happy doing social, but journalists scary, can't do that. So it's not that scary, and we'll go through that.
Finding journalists, I think, to start with is always quite tricky. So PR agencies like us will like often sort of subscribe to a database, and they'll all be there in a sort of handy address book. If you don't have that, I think it's basically just about building, so there are lots of different ways you can do it, building kind of like a manual list. So it might be that you start with, because it can be really overwhelming to be like, God, there's so many titles out there, or blogs or influencers or whatever, but building kind of like a tier of lists. So you might have a top 10 which are your absolute, we need to be in those magazines or blogs or titles or engage with those people, and then you might have another sort of tier 2, another 10, and then actually you're like, okay, I've got 30 people, and if I reached all of them, that would be pretty good. So your ways to do that, loads of them will have them listed on the website, contact details. What we often kind of do is basically people that aren't is just DM people on Twitter, and sometimes that's more effective, especially if it's not coming from the PR and it'll be coming from you guys yourselves. That's quite an effective way to do that. One kind of quick way to kind of filter through on like a day-to-day, so we will get journalists kind of getting in touch with us saying, hi, I'm writing a story on X, was wondering if you could help me, or I'm looking for an example of this. At the minute we're seeing lots of Brexit ones.
Still, yeah.
But all that kind of thing. But to filter through that, there's a account you can follow on Twitter called Journo Request, also with the hashtag NPR Request. And journalists will often attach that onto, they'll also tweet those shout outs out as well. So just having it on a kind of day-to-day, 9 out of 10 won't be relevant for you, but 1 will be. And this is, just an example of one that we found last week from someone that was looking for female founders of tech startups.
Speed is usually of the essence, so if you miss it, you miss it, that's absolutely fine. But it is useful to just keep checking. And I think going back to what Lizzie was saying about the tiered approach, if you've got something that you think's a story, much better to just pick a handful of people that you'd like to tell that story to.
Yeah.
In the bad old days of PR, it used to be quite a blanket approach of like, send the press release out to everybody. It wasn't tailored at all. Journalists, they always complain to us that they probably get, more than 200 emails a day from PRs, basically, or companies saying, you want to write about my company? With absolutely no reference to anything that they've ever written in the past. Now, journos have big egos that need to be stroked on a regular basis. So even if you can start your email with, I read that you wrote about this recently, so it made me think that you might be interested in this story. So just to show that you've put a little bit of effort in, and it's not just like, dear blank.
Yeah, and I think that also comes back down to kind of like, hey, I was wondering if you'd like to talk to me. I've just started a tech startup. We do this. Thanks.
Yeah.
And they're like, why would I want to speak to you? So like Nikki said, being like, we've just worked with a local charity to help them launch a new website, which is going to enable people. We did a one about organ donation, and that's really topical at the minute. So obviously some of those you have land on your lap, other ones you kind of have to find the story. Yeah. We worked with a customer a while ago when the NHS had the cybersecurity breach. Which was a couple of years ago, and we have a client who worked in IT kind of space, and the story broke. It was like the NHS has undergone a security breach. We just called up the BBC, all the local radio stations, and we said, we've got a security expert here who can talk about it, and then they were on the 6 o'clock news that evening. So it's that kind of like speed of essence, but it's also, if you see a story that's topical, don't be afraid to, actually that one was I just sent like an email that was like, hi, I've got someone, let me know.
Yeah.
And just talking about their credentials, like why he was an expert in that space, blah, 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 linked to a blog that he had going. But that kind of speed, but also don't be afraid to just kind of call people up. And the BBC often, again, seems like it's kind of giant, scary organisation. One way to kind of really get in with them is to just give them a call when you've got those kind of breaking stories. But also to try and reach out to the planning desks. So they are the guys who will, be planning in stories weeks and months in advance. They'll be trying to get guests lined up for the BBC sofa. If it's something that's kind of basically anything that's non-time sensitive type of thing. So,
and if it is time sensitive, then they're often frantically looking on the day for someone that's going to be able to talk about it the next day on the sofa.
Yeah.
So we've had calls at sort of 8, 9 o'clock in the evening to get somebody to breakfast for like 5:30 the next morning.
Yeah.
So what we always say to our clients in terms of having a media relations strategy is you've got your proactive media relations and your reactive media relations. So your proactive media relations is, I have a story to tell and I want to communicate it to X, Y, Z. And your reactive, as Lizzie said, is, this has happened, I know something about that, they might be interested in speaking to me. So it's being able to provide that third-party voice when another story is already breaking.
Yeah.
Another example, of a way that you can latch onto a story, you know, thinking about you specifically here actually. So say, for example, there's a story on, I mean, social care costs is such a ginormous industry story. So there's always figures coming out on wastage, cost savings. So anything that comes out that you think, actually, I can talk about how my product or my service is going to reduce costs within the social care sector. That's the sort of story that you need to be jumping on. So if you've got your list of 5 people, 5 journalists that you really want to communicate with, if a story like that breaks, you can say, I've got an opinion on this, because I know that my product can save 10% over 12 months, or, you know. So just think about how you can react to stories that are already happening.
Here was another one that we spotted kind of this week, again, kind of on LinkedIn. So Simon's the editor at Business Insider. He posts every month, these are the upcoming features. So they're there, they're available. There's no dark art magic to getting them. But there's one in this month about company culture that we will try and get some clients involved for. So it'll just be a rundown of what each feature is, and then it's just coming up with a tangible way to make you stand out from the crowd. So I think with all of these, with Twitter or ones like this, when it's kind of publicly available, that's great because it means you can get in touch really easily. But at the same time, so will everybody else. So it's just understanding about what makes you stand out from the crowd. I also just think being like really concise, you know, it comes back to our 30-second pitching thing, but like being really concise always helps, because journalists will be getting hundreds of emails, and if each one is 3 paragraphs long, they probably won't get past the first few lines. I always say about 5 sentences is quite a good email pitch. It's not like words to live by, but I think it's just quite something to think about. When I look back at pitches I send to journalists, I'm like, oh, it's quite a bit longer than that. I just try and cut it down, because if you can say it in a shorter sense of words, then also much the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this just kind of reiterates that really. So I think on any kind of, whether it's content that you're creating for the website, marketing collateral for a trade event you're going to, pitching into journalists, it's always about considering the reader first. So, you know, when we were talking about a minute ago about this is my product and this is what I do, but actually it comes back to the buyer personas we were chatting through, and actually what problem does it solve? How much time has it saved? Did it stop someone from falling down the stairs? You know, like what was the, either a kind of human interest story or some kind of problem that was kind of solved, or benefit that it added. Every word must count, keeping it short, planning what you're saying is kind of a given, but I just, again, thinking that being like as concise as you possibly can. Small things like always put a link to your website, you know, like anything that is a barrier to the journalist finding out more about you or who you are is just a like, if there's 50 others that he or she can pick from, then why would they kind of bother? So just like small things about just making it as easy as possible for the journalist.
Follow them on social beforehand, get a flavour for the sorts of things they're interested in and outside of work. Just, you know, they're human beings, but it's time. That's the thing that's always difficult with journalists, and that's what comes back to, if you are going to pick up a phone and call them, be absolutely sure that you can get what you want to get across in 30 seconds, basically.
The big biggie is English, not marketing or tech. So it's basically about jargon. You know, if you can't, you know, everyone always says that kind of age-old thing, if you can't explain it to your nan, then no one else will kind of really understand what you're saying. But we get so many things about people saying, I've got this disruptive technology, but they don't have the proof point to back it up, or, you know, like you can't believe some of the stuff that you kind of read, and I'm like, what? We went to a briefing ages ago actually with the editor at Wired, but he said that they've actually banned the word disruptive from the office, and no one's allowed to write that or say it. And I was like, exactly. And I'm like, I'm sure some people are, but you know, unless you've got like a really good proof point, it's quite tough. So yeah, just thinking about like those kind of jargony words, and I think that all links back to what differentiates you just speaking to people in a way that they can understand.
Journalists do not like it at all, and they are harsh on PRs and companies that use it, basically. I mean, this is just an example. I don't know if anyone knows Douchebag Strategist, but it's basically like, it's a Twitter account that basically just takes the mickey out of marketers and their jargon. So you'll see none of it makes sense, but equally, part of you thinks, I might have read that once in a press release. So there's a lot of this on Twitter of taking the mickey out of marketing jargon. So we have to try and avoid.
Yeah. I think just always being quite tough on yourself and second guessing is probably a good place to start. Yeah, and this is just a kind of roundup again about, you know, media is obviously a massive way to communicate with people. It's also kind of things that you just, I think if you've written a story or you've gotten in touch with somebody about a certain comment and stuff, it's all about making sure you do as much with that as possible. So even if you wrote some comment for a journalist and it didn't get in, will it make a nice blog for the website? Yeah. Are you going to send that coverage out to your email database and post it on social channels? Again, like really small, simple things, but just that all kind of connects the dots. These are just a handful of things that are kind of happening in Manchester now that might be relevant. Tech Show North was last, I think, May. Always worth just kind of going for a browse, kind of meeting people, you know, tweeting before you go, if anyone wants to meet for coffee, that kind of thing. Manchester Digital's just launched a Slack channel, I think this week, that's quite good again for kind of just having chats with people, getting to know. It also gives you a bit of a kind of who's who. I think it's quite good to do some social stalking. Creative Kitchen is a meet-up for developers, very good for kind of recruitment purposes. Women in Tech meetups, there's loads going on, Business Cloud's in this building, you know, so it's just kind of thinking as well as all the kind of events that you can and should be going to. Co-working spaces are so good for stuff like that. You know, they'll invite people to do like lightning talks, elevator pitches at evenings, meet our community, that kind of stuff. They'll also, you know, like if you want to host an event, so a lot of the work that we do at Fourth Day for our own PR and marketing is not really, you know, we host events that just for the benefit, you know, to discuss an interesting topic or that's got nothing to do with PR, but just to try and kind of bring people together for value add, those kind of things. So all just thinking outside the box.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that we haven't been able to talk about in terms of writing a press release and media training and all of these things. And we talked a bit about social schedules and getting the balance right between talking about yourself as a company and saying, oh, look, we've had a bake sale. No, not overdoing that sort of, you don't actually have to work here, but it helps sort of thing, can be a bit grating after a while. So it's having that balance between the type of content that you're putting out on social. But I feel like there's lots more we could go into, but we just don't have time. The thing to say is not to get disheartened if you don't get through after 10 times. So I think a lot of people give up on phoning journalists because it's really hard. But I would always assume that if you sent an email, the chances of it being read are probably about 10 to 15% of getting a reply.
Which is also depressing, but it's like,
really depressing, really depressing. But just reality. So we would always advocate phoning and phoning again and phoning again. It's just that when you catch them, you have to be really brief and really ready for it. So, you know, we've even got told off for saying things like, hope you're well, how are you? Haven't got time, no time for that, pleasantries.
The colours, communications exercise there, and I think you just assume that they're all red.
Yes, yeah. It's not about being unfriendly, but it's that they literally say they haven't got time for any pleasantries.
They don't have time to tell you that they don't have time.
No.
And it's also like, we all get quite a few emails, but so I think just like being super to the point is really useful. So if you are picking up the phone, they're like, yep, or, you know, this is worst case scenario, but kind of having a thick skin for that, being a little bit prepared. You won't be the first person they've said that to by any means. But being like, hey, it's such and such, just wanted to call you about a story that's just broken on Thing and was wondering if you'd be interested in some comment. We're a tech startup based in Manchester that deliver this. You know, being really thin. Yeah. And if they're like, sorry, what does it do? You know, and having, so they're only ever really going to ask you 3 or 4 questions. So it's just absolutely having those prepared and being like, oh, well, we were founded in 2015. No, like it's absolutely got to kind of be like, and I think things that will help keep them on the phone for longer. So if you've got a big name brand that you can name drop, I'll be like, yeah, I saw that you did a story on Thingy Thingy last week. These guys actually work with them, and something that will just be like, oh, okay, I'll give you a little bit more time.
Something that they might not know, or that adds to a story that they've already done that you know is something that they're interested in. So I think that's definitely a good point of the starting with the why thing of like, oh, we heard that this has just happened, so you might be interested. So not like starting with, you might be interested in talking to us because, but starting with this is the story and this is why we're relevant to that story.
Yeah, and I think a lot of journalists now as well some of them will like be freelance, but the practicalities of that is that they will get, like they're pitching in stories as well to an editor.
Yeah.
So they want something that's really interesting. They're not like, oh, I can just kind of write about what I want to and thingy. They need something that, they can kind of deliver and stuff.
But they can be a nice channel for you.
Yeah, freelancers are a good way.
They're desperate to sell stories in. So, and you've got a little bit more lead time with them. So find freelancers on social media and spend a bit of time following them and looking at the sort of stories they write, because then you can craft a pitch. You'll probably get a little bit more time from them because you're going to try and give them the whole story that then they can sell on. I mean, that's the other thing for journalists is that, Trish will probably feed all this back to Chris now and me saying they've got big egos and they're lazy. So I'm married to one, so I can get away with it. I'm always criticising. But, they're also quite lazy, stroke time-starved, whichever way you want to look at it. So as much as you can give them... If you can give them as much as possible. So say, for example, you are responding to the story that Lucy's just spoken about. You said, right, I've noticed this has happened. Thought you might be interested in talking to us. We could also actually provide a customer who's gone through this. So you've just then created the whole thing, and that journalist can think, right, I haven't got to do anything.
Yeah. And it's small things as well about, I think, always sending pictures. 9 times out of 10 they won't print it if it hasn't got a picture to go with it, because it means they've got to go and either find a stock image or something to fill that page. So again, it's just like making it as easy as possible for them. The customers one is great because it's also like, if you've got a customer, it's a nice chance for them to say, oh, do you want to be in the MEN? It's a nice kind of value add for them sort of thing. So using customers as the headline story, children's charity empowers thingy, using this technology. It's all that kind of stuff. So if you can lead with them, that's always quite a good shout. But it's also, I mean, we're making all journalists out to be really nasty. They're not at all. And I think ones where you can basically, keeping an eye on like new appointments and stuff. So the MEN's just appointed somebody new on the business desk. So, being like, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. This is what we do. These are the angles we can talk about. Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Get in touch if there's anything that you want to kind of thing. It would be great to go for a coffee. So building kind of obviously those longer term relationships, people that are more accessible.
When people are new. Yeah. Because I'm sure Chris at Business Cloud would back this up. It's like another thing for journalists, if they know that you're a reliable spokesperson, that you make, concise, clear comments and you're good for a quote, they'll definitely come back to you and use you again. So if you can, think about that when you're building your relationships. If you get in with somebody that's new to a publication or young, just developing their career, and you provide yourself as a reliable contact, they'll come back time and time again. The other thing I would just say is never rule out broadcast, because if you feel that you have a story that has an element of human interest, and quite a few people today have definitely got that. Regional broadcasts in particular are excellent, like regional radio, fantastic place to not only to pitch a story, but to get some media relations training. Really accessible, really open to, they will give you a bit more time on the phone actually, because again, you can go through planning, so they're actually thinking ahead to stories.
And they have 24 hours to fill, so they
have 24 hours to fill, and it's it's often really neglected because people feel quite nervous about broadcast. Actually, we find it really receptive to all sorts of stories, so never rule them out. When we were talking about the manufacturing, creativity and manufacturing, so that would be your central campaign theme, and then you think about what that big piece of content might be, whether it's a video, podcast, white paper. But then what we've tried to do here is show you what you can do with one piece of content or with one idea. Contributors is a way of bringing influencers in, or third-party commentators, so that you're not only going to distribute the content yourself, you hope the people that you bring in will also distribute that content to amplify it. But from that one piece of content, you can get thought leadership pieces that you can try and place in the media, you can get blogs that you can use for your website, you can get a whole schedule of social posts. So, for example, we were talking about social schedules. If we do a white paper or a video with a client, we could easily get 2 weeks worth of social schedules out of that, just by picking out quotes, for example, and just running those over a period of days. You can use it as direct marketing, so to try and draw people to download something or to click through to it. And obviously this all helps with your SEO. So it's trying to not be overwhelmed, because we know that you're stretched for time and that you can't go off and do a fully fledged PR campaign. But what you can do is have one idea and say, okay, well, we can actually get 10 things from this one idea. So let's plan out how that might filter down. That might you could drop me a note about that and I can explain that in a bit more detail. But thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.